All right, so I have 3 articles for you today. None of them great. Actually, they go from this sucks to this is just beyond the pale. Actually, they might all fall into that latter category. Okay, now the first 2 articles are from CNN. And the first one is Trump and his allies mount a pressure campaign against U.S. elections ahead of the midterms. So, in case you thought that, it's the Democrats who are cheating on elections, no, it's not. A few weeks ago, Republican election officials in Colorado began receiving unsolicited calls and texts from a GOP consultant who said he was working with the Trump administration on election integrity. In a text to one of the officials, the consultant, Jeff Small, indicated he was acting on a request from Stephen Miller, the White House Deputy Chief of Staff. In a phone call with another clerk, Small said he was coordinating with the White House and the Justice Department to implement an elections executive order signed by the President Donald Trump, recalled Justin Grantham, the top election official in Fremont County. Grantham and Carly Copes, who oversees elections in Weld County in northern Colorado, told CNN that Small made a specific request. Would they give a third party access to their election equipment? Because there's nothing suspicious about asking that. Both declined. Not only is that a hard no, you're not even going to breathe on my equipment, Cops said. The outreach to the Colorado clerks is just one of a flurry of recent federal actions launched by the Trump administration and groups aligned with the president. While the White House distanced itself from Small, Trump and his allies are collecting vast amounts of voter data and working to change the ground rules for next year's midterms, often by invoking federal government authority. And I'm sure the only reason they're distancing themselves from Small is not because they disapprove of what he's doing, but because he got caught. Because this became known that this was written about. Otherwise, they would be perfectly fine. Next year's midterms hold enormous stakes for Trump and his opposition. Democrats need to net just 3 seats in the U.S. House in 2026 to flip control of the chamber from Republicans. A Democratic-led House could block Trump's legislative agenda and launch investigations of the president in the second half of his second term. Samantha Tazari, CEO of the nonprofit Voting Rights Lab, which has closely tracked state developments, said she believes Trump is gearing up to use the power of his office to interfere in the 2026 election. What started as an unconstitutional executive order, marching orders for state action regardless of its fate in court, has grown into a full federal mobilization to seize power over our elections. White House spokesperson Harrison Field said Trump is fighting for election integrity and will keep doing so despite Democrat objections that reveal their disdain for common sense safeguards like verifying citizenship. Right, that's why you told Texas I want 5 Republican seats. So they're going to gerrymander the fuck out of Texas, or at least they're attempting to, just so he can get that. Yeah, but he cares about election integrity because citizenship is the problem, not gerrymandering a map to death so Democrats will never win ever again. So, yay. But, that's okay. California's like, you do that, Texas, we're totally doing it the same way. I wonder how many seats they would garner by doing that, if it would be a wash. Free and fair elections are the bedrock of our constitutional republic, and we're confident in securing an ultimate victory in the courtroom, he said in an email. Actually, if it goes up to the Supreme Court, he just might. All right. Restricting who can access election machines and sensitive voting software has grown even more important to election officials in recent years, following voting system breaches in states such as Colorado and Georgia. Trump allies have sought access to machines to find evidence that could back up the president's claim that widespread fraud marred the 2020 election. Spoiler alert, there isn't any. But election watchdogs and some Democratic election officials say activity by Trump and aligned groups since his return to the White House has raised fears of a broader effort to reshape elections. Recent actions by the administration and its allies include Trump signing executive order in March that sought to force states to require proof of citizenship to register to vote and take enforcement action against states that accept mail ballots after Election Day. Federal judges have blocked parts of the executive order, noting that the power to regulate elections rests with the states and Congress, not the president. Not to mention, it's not like any Yahoo can show up and say, I want to vote. That's not how this works. So, what verification do you need? I mean, that just continues this crap conspiracy theory about widespread fraud. There isn't widespread fraud. It's just that Republicans want to control who gets to vote. The Republican National Committee pushed to obtain voter registration records from states. On the day Trump signed the executive order, the RNC sent records requests to 48 states and Washington, D.C., seeking information on how they maintained voter registration lists. And the RNC has sued New Jersey, home to a closely watched gubernatorial race this fall, alleging officials there had failed to respond to its request for voter data and documents related to voting machine audits. A spokesperson for New Jersey's election divisions declined to comment on the litigation. The Justice Department asked more than a dozen states in recent weeks to provide voter lists, explain their procedures for removing potential ineligible voters from their rolls, or discuss entering into information-sharing agreements to help the agency root out election fraud. The demands range from seeking copies of voting rolls in political battlegrounds such as Michigan to a broad request in Colorado to provide election records as far back as 2020. I can't imagine why such a random date like 2020. Republicans in Texas undertaking a rare mid-decade redistricting following entreaties from Trump. A map released Wednesday by GOP lawmakers who control the state legislature aims to take over 5 additional Democratic seats, which would give the GOP the edge in 30 of the state's 38 congressional districts. The Republican-controlled House in April approved the SAVE Act, which mirrors parts of Trump's executive order requiring proof of citizenship to register to vote. The proposed legislation also would make it a crime for election officials to mistakenly register someone to vote who has not provided proof of citizenship. Critics note that it's already illegal for non-citizens to cast ballots in federal elections and say requiring proof of citizenship could disenfranchise eligible voters who lack the needed documents or change their name through marriage. And that was a big deal about how, you can only vote if if the name of your birth certificate matches your current name. Which, last time I checked, most women change their name upon marriage. I mean, some may hyphenate it, some may keep their maiden name, but most women change their name. Hence, that is not the name on their birth certificate. What the hell? Nothing says we don't want women to vote. Then let's make it so married women cannot vote. Because let's face it, most women want to get married, have gotten married, or even if they get divorced, if they don't ask to have their name changed back, they're still screwed, even if they're single, simply because they just don't have the correct name, which is just asinine. Women shouldn't be disenfranchised just because they dare to get married and take their husband's name or their wife's name. I mean, same-sex marriage is a thing. So they might each hyphenate their names, or they might or in some cases the man takes the woman's name. That's less frequent, but it has happened. So it can potentially affect men too, but it mostly affects women. All right. To justify the redistricting in his state, Texas Governor Greg Abbott cited a letter from Harmeet Dillon, head of the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division, that challenged the legality of 4 existing congressional districts. Dillon said in a statement, "Clean voter rolls and basic election safeguards are requisites for free, fair, and transparent elections." She said the agency has a statutory mandate to enforce our federal voting rights laws, and ensuring the voting public's confidence in the integrity of our elections is a top priority of this administration. Trump has been blunt about his partisan goals in Texas, and he has suggested that other GOP-controlled states should pursue their own redistricting efforts, a move that threatens to set off an all-out redistricting war this year with Democrats in California and other Democrat-led states. Now, to be honest, I'm torn on this one. On one hand, we've been trying to play by the rules while the Republicans have been fighting dirty, and we've been getting our asses kicked. On the other hand, I'm concerned that once we start fighting dirty and fighting fire with fire, how easy is it going to be go back to, being lawful and decent and not having the maps gerrymandered to hell? That does concern me, but yeah. The administration's recent actions have unsettled some election officials who have endured years of threats and harassment following the 2020 election and the conspiracy theories about election fraud that flourished in its aftermath. I mean, hell, all you have to do is look at those election workers in Georgia who won their lawsuit against Rudy Giuliani. I mean, a lot of people threatened them simply because they were quick to believe that they were doing something wrong, even though they've been election workers for years, simply because their chosen deity told them to. Election officials are surfing on quicksand, said David Becker, executive director and founder of the Nonpartisan Center for Election Innovation and Research and a former DOJ voting rights lawyer. They don't know what the executive order means, if it has any meaning whatsoever, he said. They don't know if they will be investigated just for having done their jobs. They don't know if the vast power of the federal government is going to be weaponized against them. They don't know if the Department of Justice is going to be suing them. Considering the recent jobs report that came out. And so Trump decided to fire the commissioner who had nothing to do with gathering and tabulating the results. She just had to report the results to the president, and she got fired because let's shoot the messenger. That these election officials have a lot to worry about, because if their district goes the wrong way, if their precinct goes the wrong way, who knows what Trump and his goons are going to do. A recent survey of 858 local election officials by the liberal-leaning Brennan Center for Justice at New York University's Law School bears that out. It found that more than half of the local election officials, 59%, say they are concerned about political leaders engaged in efforts to interfere with how election officials do their jobs. And 46% said they were concerned about politically motivated investigations of their work or that of their fellow election officials. In early July, as previously reported by the Washington Post and media outlets in Colorado, Republican election clerks began receiving calls and texts from Small, who has worked for Colorado GOP Representative Lauren Boebert and for the U.S. Interior Department during Trump's first term, now is a principal with Denver public affairs firm. County officials interviewed by CNN said Small told them he was reaching out specifically to Republican clerks in blue states in a push to help advance Trump's executive order. Grantham, the election clerk in Fremont County, said Small's outreach to only Republican officials was an early red flag during their conversation. Another concern arose, he said, when Small mentioned gaining access to the county's election equipment. Okay, this is how stupid he is, but then again, he did used to work for Boebert, so... But this is how stupid he is. If you're gonna crime... Why just bring it out in the open and say, I'm criming? Does he think because he's talking to Republican clerks that they'll be like, oh, okay, and not have any integrity whatsoever? No, they're not. Just because you are sucking Donald Trump's dick doesn't mean all Republicans are. It just means that MAGA will do anything and everything Trump says, but not all Republicans are MAGA. All right, so why would you admit that you're only calling Republican election clerks in blue states? I mean, you're just basically screaming, I'm doing something illegal. It just makes no sense whatsoever. My response was, I didn't believe that the president had the authority in the Constitution to write executive orders to affect elections, and that until the Supreme Court found that he could, I would not let anybody access my voting equipment. Careful. It's entirely possible the Supreme Court will, in fact, do just that. Because no, I do not trust this Supreme Court at all. CNN reached out to Small, and his attorney, Suzanne Taheri, responded to CNN's inquiry. In a text, Taheri said Small's outreach supported efforts by allies in the administration to encourage officials to participate in President Trump's election security executive order. No, it doesn't. Because if this was just about election security, he would talk to all election clerks in all precincts, and that they would come up with a solution that didn't involve a third party looking at the equipment and dinking around in there. That's not what is happening here. So, yeah. He undertook the activity on a volunteer basis during his own free time while on paternity leave, she added. Neither Small nor Taheri answered questions about who exactly in administration asked him to contact the clerks. Of course they can't, because either they did it on their own or they don't want to admit that it was Stephen Miller. The White House distanced itself from Small's actions in a statement. Jeff Small does not speak for the White House, nor was he ever authorized to do official business on behalf of the White House, a White House spokesperson said in an email to CNN. Miller did not respond to CNN requests for comment. Of course not, because they know they're guilty as fuck. In Colorado, election officials say there is heightened sensitivity around who can access election equipment after the high-profile prosecution of former Mesa County elections clerk Tina Peters. She became a celebrity among pro-Trump activists who have advanced false claims that voting machines had been rigged to flip votes from Trump to then-candidate Joe Biden in the 2020 election. Many state laws set strict security standards for voting machines to prevent tampering with elections. Colorado has specifically barred third parties from accessing election equipment. Last year, a judge sentenced Peters to 9 years in prison after she was convicted on state charges for her role in a breach of her county's election system as part of an unsuccessful hunt for fraud. Trump and his administration have taken up Peters' cause, however. Earlier this year, the Justice Department said it was reviewing her case as part of a broad mandate from Trump to counter prosecutions it said were aimed at inflicting political pain than toward pursuing actual justice. What? Trump wouldn't do a thing like that. And in a social media post in May, the president weighed in personally, calling Peters an innocent political prisoner. Does he know what words mean? And directing the Justice Department to take all necessary action to help secure her release. Colorado Secretary of State Jenna Griswold told CNN that her office has provided recent voter data to the Justice Department that's generally available to the public. But she said she declined to comply with a request related to records from the 2020 election because the federal government has no legal basis to seek it. Federal law only requires the preservation of election data in federal races for 22 months. Griswold, a Democrat, said Trump's recent actions demonstrate the president is using the power of the federal government to undermine American elections and undermine voter confidence in them. Exactly. They keep screaming that there's fraud, so when they inevitably commit fraud, they can point and say, see, fraud's being committed, and so it'll just give them an excuse to tighten their reins on said fraud. And then cause more fraud, and we have no longer free and fair elections. In Colorado, a state Trump lost in all three of his White House bids, tensions over election administration remained high. Copes, the Republican clerk of Weld County, said she faced so many threats for her outspoken defense of the 2020 election results and her county's use of Dominion voting machines that she began to vary her routes to and from work, a practice she continues today. This is literally something that I saw on NCIS LA. Spies do that, so they don't get caught. And now an election worker has to do that because of fear for her life. Simply because people didn't like the results of the election. I mean, do Democrats like the result of this election? No, they don't. And yes, there are some who question whether the election was rigged, which, considering the way Trump works, wouldn't surprise me if it was. But we haven't seen evidence of it. I mean, claiming that that there are people who voted in unevenly in certain elections, like this many people voted for Kamala Harris, but this many people voted for this senator or this rep, and think that because the numbers don't add up that somehow proves fraud. No, some people just skip certain races. They might be like, you know what, I don't like either of these people, so I'm just going to skip it. Now, I would say that that's that's actually handing things to Trump, but at least that makes sense, and it's not a case of voter fraud. And yes, there are some Democrats some on the left who do claim this. And it's, unless you can prove actual evidence of fraud, just saying that the vote totals don't match because not everybody voted in every election on the ballot isn't proof of fraud. Anyway, Crane, the head of the Clerks Association, said it took a lot of courage for county clerks to rebuff the recent overtures, given the climate of suspicion and harassment that still persists. He noted that an elections official in southern Colorado housing Dominion machines was firebombed recently. No one was injured in the after-hours incident. Okay. Now, I'm sorry, but why are we attacking Dominion voting machines? I mean, they sued Fox. They sued, I think, was it OAN or Newsmax, for defamation, and everybody settled. And suddenly you don't hear people talking about Dominion. It's because they know they fucked up. They went after someone with teeth. They went after someone who is willing to fight back. So they had to stop. So, but, these are the people who believed in Pizzagate and went to a restaurant that didn't even have a freaking basement to save the children. And only to find out, oh, we were had. It's the same shit. The threats against election officials are very real, he added. Okay, so that is the end of that article. So, more crap from Trump. This one isn't about elections, but it's about the Smithsonian. You might have heard that the Smithsonian was removing Trump's two impeachments in his first term. Which, that's not a good look. Not a good look at all. It sounds like they're capitulating to a bully. Which, make the bully take a stand. Because more often than not, you're going to end up winning against said bully because the bully is a weak moron. But anyway, Smithsonian temporarily removes reference to Trump's impeachments from presidency exhibit. The Smithsonian's National Museum of American History last month temporarily removed a board that referenced President Donald Trump's two impeachments from an exhibit on the American presidency. In a statement to CNN on Thursday, the Smithsonian Institution said the decision, which was first reported by the Washington Post, was made after a review of the museum's legacy content this year. The institution said in a statement Saturday that it was not asked by any administration or other government official to remove content from the exhibit, and that the exhibit will be updated in the coming weeks to reflect all impeachment proceedings in our nation's history. Okay, there haven't been any since Trump, so why just remove Trump's? Why not remove Andrew Johnson's? Why not remove Bill Clinton's then? Why just remove Trump's? I mean, that is not a good look, even if it is completely in good faith. It's not a good look that his is the only one that was removed. Why was it removed? Unmentioned in the statements was Trump's executive order earlier this year that appeared crafted to direct the Smithsonian to soften or distort forthright discussions about certain aspects of American history, which could include the legacy of racism in the United States and part of Trump's own history-making but controversial first term. The exhibit has last been updated in 2008 and included information about the impeachments of Presidents Andrew Johnson and Bill Clinton, and the impeachment process against President Richard Nixon, who resigned over the Watergate scandal before he could be formally impeached. So, okay, hasn't been updated since 2008. Wait a minute, but they put a board for Donald Trump's impeachments. So what, are they just going to clean it up and make it look more like what Andrew Johnson and Bill Clinton have? I mean, I'm very confused. Trump is the only president in American history to be impeached twice. In 2019 on charges alleging he unlawfully solicited Ukraine to influence the 2020 presidential election, and in 2021 for his actions related to the insurrection at the U.S. Capitol that year. He was acquitted both times by the Senate because Republicans thought he would learn his lesson. And the lesson he learned is he can get away with shit. And now this Congress is showing that in spades by just rolling over and letting Trump pretty much do what he wants. Not everything. They did go on recess like they were supposed to, because they didn't, even though Trump wanted them to push through his nominees. The House, however, Mike Johnson was like, oh, we might have to vote on Epstein. Bye. So, for those who want to know who don't remember the 2019 charges, that's the quid pro quo phone call that Trump made with Zelensky. That if we will help you if you find dirt on Joe Biden. Well, specifically Hunter Biden, but that was supposed to tie him to Joe Biden. Because obviously everything a child does is directly related to the parent. In September 2021, the Smithsonian placed a board over the exhibit that read, "Case under redesign. History happens," and referenced Trump's 2 impeachments. Okay, so that makes a bit more sense. They want to update the exhibit. So this isn't quite as bad as it seems, but the fact that they're doing it now, I mean, they couldn't have put up the Trump exhibit, I don't know, after his first term ended, in 2020. Basically update the exhibit every 4 years when there's a new election. But on December 18, 2019, the House impeached Donald Trump for abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. The reference to Trump's first impeachment read, "The charges focused on the president's solicitation of foreign influence in the 2020 presidential election and his defiance of congressional subpoenas. President Trump was acquitted in January 2020. On January 13, 2021, Donald Trump became the first president to be impeached twice. The reference to his second impeachment read, "The charge was incitement of insurrection based on repeated false statements challenging the 2020 election results, and his January 6th speech that encouraged and foreseeably resulted in lawless activity at the Capitol. Because Trump's term ended on January 20th, his acquittal on February 13th made him the first former president tried by the Senate. The Smithsonian said in a statement that the board was intended to be a short-term measure to address current events at the time. However, the label remained in place until July 2025. Again, I know history happens. Why did we wait so long then to update that exhibit? That makes zero sense to me. The statement added, a large permanent gallery like the American presidency that opened in 2000 requires a significant amount of time and funding to update and renew. A future and updated exhibit will include all impeachments. The Smithsonian said in a Saturday statement that the placard did not meet the museum standards in appearance, location, timeline, and overall presentation. It was not consistent with other sections in the exhibit and moreover blocked the view of the objects inside its case. Asked about the removal of references to Trump's impeachment, a White House spokesperson said in a statement, unfortunately, for far too long, the Smithsonian museums have highlighted divisive DEI exhibits which are out of touch with mainstream America. What the fuck does that have to do with the presidency exhibit? Literally, what does that have to do with anything? Oh my God. We are fully supportive of updating displays to highlight American greatness, spokesperson David Ingalls said. The Trump administration will continue working to ensure that the Smithsonian removes all improper ideology and once again unites and instills pride in all Americans regarding our great history. Okay, so you don't want the impeachments to be put back on the display. What I still don't understand is, okay, it takes time and to update, to renew. I get that. You are a museum. It is your literal job to keep these exhibits updated. And the longer you wait, the more you have to update. I mean, I do not know why we're waiting this long. Trump's order aimed at the Smithsonian is just one example of his efforts to exert his influence on American cultural, athletic, and artistic institutions and browbeat them into eliminating aspects of their work. Just see the Kennedy Center. Or the fact that he's made a culture war against trans people. He wants to eliminate them from all walks of life because reasons. They include his efforts to take over the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts, to have the Washington Commanders football team revert to their old name, which I do not understand why. I'm guessing he can't remember the new one. And to stop the participation of transgender people in women's sports. All right. So, let me see if there was any updates to this article while I was reading it. Nope, doesn't look like it. So, alrighty then. So that is the end of that article. Here's hoping that it truly is just a temporary takedown and that they will put those impeachments back up. Now, here is something that I've been trying to stay out of this conflict because both sides need a timeout because both sides are acting like children. But at the same time, this just really boils my blood. And also, I think I might have done a part of a video when I mentioned this, that this starvation in Gaza, there are living hostages still in Gaza. If you're starving all the Palestinians in Gaza, you're also starving the hostages. It's really not hard to figure out. So, the article from NBC News. Outcry in Israel as Hamas releases video of emaciated hostage alongside starving Palestinian children. Outcry rang out in Israel over the weekend after Hamas released video appearing to show a visibly gaunt Israeli hostage alongside images of emaciated babies as international fury grows over the rising deaths of Palestinians from starvation under Israel's offensive and crippling aid restrictions. But according to Bibi, Saint Bibi, there is no starvation in Gaza. The undated video, which NBC News was not able to independently verify, appears to show Eviatar David, who was one of around 250 people taken hostage during the Hamas-led October 7, 2023 attacks. Standing in an apparent tunnel while shirtless, David, who is 24, according to the Hostages and Missing Families Forum, which represent hostage families, appears markedly frail, his ribs and shoulder blades visible through his skin. The footage was juxtaposed with images of small emaciated children, their bones poking out from beneath their skin, as the number of children dying from starvation in Gaza under Israel's offensive and aid restrictions continues to rise. Nearly 170 people in Gaza, more than 90 of them children, have died from malnutrition since the war began, according to the Palestinian Health Ministry in the enclave, with the death toll climbing swiftly in recent weeks. Speaking at a rally in Tel Aviv on Saturday, David's relatives expressed fear he could face the same fate, with his brother, Ile David, calling on the Israeli and U.S. governments to do everything in your power by any means necessary to secure his release, according to statements shared by the Hostages and Missing Families Forum. The footage from Hamas came a day after the Palestinian Islamic Jihad militant group, which is also holding Israeli hostages, released its own video appearing to show a visibly withered Ram Brazlovsky, who was also taken captive on October 7, 2023. Another reason why returning the hostages is so hard, because Hamas doesn't have all the hostages. President Donald Trump's envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, met with hostage families on Saturday and emphasized the Trump administration's commitment to returning the 50 hostages who remain in Gaza. The Hostages and Missing Families Forum said in a statement, of the 50 who remain captive, just over 20 were believed to be alive as of late June, according to the Prime Minister's office. The forum quoted Witkoff as saying, "We know who is alive, and someone will be to blame if they don't come out alive." NBC News was not able to independently confirm the comment. Well, I'm pretty sure that's supposed to be an attack on Hamas, that they will be blamed, but how about blaming Israel? They're not exactly doing what they can to ensure the hostages come back either, because Bibi has a stake in this war continuing. The longer the war continues, the longer he stays in power, the longer he stays out of jail. The meeting came a day after Witkoff made a short and extremely rare trip into Gaza alongside Mike Huckabee, the U.S. ambassador to Israel, in a visit condemned by some as a publicity stunt. Well, of course it was. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu also spoke at length with the families of the two men on Saturday night, expressing deep shock at the recordings released by Hamas, according to his office. Of course he's expressing deep shock, because he's trying to convince the world there's no starvation in Gaza. And if the people, if they see that the hostages are also starving, that's just going to piss them off more. Either that, or it's just, how dare Hamas not feed the hostages? Because obviously it's not Israel's fault. Nothing, according to Bibi, is ever Israel's fault. In a statement, Netanyahu accused Hamas of deliberately starving both hostages and Palestinian civilians in Gaza by preventing them from receiving aid. David's brother similarly accused Hamas of starving him deliberately during Saturday's rally. If there's no fucking food in Gaza, how the hell are they supposed to be feeding the hostages? Do people think, or do they just want to rely on raw racism? I mean, don't get me wrong. I wouldn't be surprised even if the Palestinians were receiving food if Hamas would do that. That wouldn't surprise me one bit. But the fact remains that you cannot blame Hamas when it's the Israelis who aren't even letting aid in. Israeli authorities have repeatedly accused Hamas of diverting aid from Palestinian civilians throughout the war, but multiple aid groups have said they saw no signs of aid diversion, while an internal U.S. government analysis found no evidence of systemic theft of aid supplies by Hamas, according to a report presented to State Department officials and later seen by NBC News. The Israeli military dismissed the report as biased. Because just like Trump, who will only acknowledge things that make him look good as being legit, same thing here. These aid groups are just being biased against the poor Jews because the Jews are evil incarnate in everybody's eyes and we're always the victims and boo-hoo, poor Jews. No, just because the Holocaust happened does not mean that you get carte blanche to act as dickish as you want. That is not the way human works. Yes, the Holocaust was a tragedy. My father is a survivor. He was a survivor. So, no, I'm not going to downplay the Holocaust. Never. But that doesn't mean that from now until eternity, Israelis and Jews can just do whatever they want and claim that they can do it because they were the victims of the Holocaust at some point. Even though a lot of the people who are now doing this weren't in the Holocaust. They're not old enough. So, yeah. And there was something else I wanted to mention. Oh, yes, and then there are the doctors, and I think I mentioned it in a previous video, there are doctors who will have baby formula confiscated. How can you confiscate baby formula? The IDF, confiscate baby formula, and then claim that it's Hamas that's preventing the starvation. You're not letting babies get baby formula. How the hell can that be Hamas's problem? Israel's deadly military offensive and crippling aid restrictions in recent months have caused the spiraling hunger crisis in Gaza, aid groups, including the United Nations, have repeatedly said. Israel launched a blockade in March that barred the entry of aid into the enclave in the midst of its ceasefire with Hamas. It lifted the blockade in May, but has still allowed only a trickle of basic supplies into the territory. Last Sunday, the Israeli military said it would pause military activity in some areas to allow more aid into Gaza as it faced mounting international outrage over the spiraling hunger crisis. Humanitarian organizations have warned that while more aid has begun to trickle into the enclave, it is still not nearly enough to stave off famine. Exactly, because these people are so malnourished and so starved that it's not like, what, okay, they got a full meal. Woohoo! They're not starving anymore. That's not how starvation works. That's not how malnutrition works. They need medical aid at this point. The world's leading body on hunger, the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, or IPC, said on Tuesday that the worst-case scenario of famine was already unfolding in the Palestinian enclave under Israel's deadly military offensive. It noted that its warning was an alert and not a formal famine classification. Netanyahu has denied there is starvation in Gaza, despite the IPC's report and rising deaths from starvation reported by local health officials and aid groups. Israel launched its offensive in Gaza following the Hamas-led October 7, 2023 attacks, in which some 1,200 people were killed and around 250 taken hostage, marking a major escalation in a decades-long conflict. Since then, more than 80,800 people have been killed in Gaza, including thousands of children, while thousands more have been injured, according to the local health ministry, and much of the enclave has been reduced to rubble. Israel continues to face allegations of genocide in its assault in Gaza in a case brought before the International Court of Justice, while a growing number of experts and advocates have also accused the country of genocidal acts, a charge both Israel and the U.S. have rejected. But it is genocide when you don't care if you're bombing residential areas because there might be one Hamas among them, because you're so dead set on killing Hamas that you do not care about all the other people around them. Not to mention, hostages are embedded with the Palestinians. They're not necessarily just being held in tunnels or in one enclave of the controlled by Hamas or controlled by the Islamic Jihad. They're being held with everyday citizens. So when you attack those everyday citizens, you are potentially attacking your own hostages. Actually, there's already been stories about the IDF opening fire on their own hostages after the hostages had seemingly escaped and said, "Hey, we're here," and they ended up dead for their efforts. Simply because the IDF has been told to kill everything that fucking moves in Gaza. So yeah, they are committing genocide. The fact that Israel and the U.S. don't like that word, well, then stop committing genocide and people will stop accusing you of it. Anyway, that is the last article I have. So that is the end of this video. And with that, I will see you guys in the next one.